and welcome to Nana's Crafty Home. My name is Tanya. Today's tutorial is going to show you how to crochet the braided or zigzag slip stitch join. This is a textured join between squares that is worked with a slip stitch. I really love this slip stitch join. It has a very nice light texture and it works great in a contrasting color because it really allows that stitch to shine and stand out from the rest of your blanket. However, you could certainly choose to use a coordinating color, so you could have done this in a blue. I am joining my Christmas 9 Christmas granny square blanket together using this method. And if you want the free written pattern instructions for all 9 of these squares, below in the description I will have links to all of these free square patterns. I will also be releasing a new tutorial for the border for this blanket in just a few days, so check back for that as well. So to get started on this slip stitch join, I'm going to go ahead and get my yarn on my hook here. And when you're working this join, you're going to want to join your columns together first and then come back and join your rows. And to get started, we're going to find our corner and we're going to begin working in this corner. And this is my front square, this is my back square. They have the right sides facing up, so I am looking at the right side, the front side of each of these squares. And I'm going to find my corner space here. So these granny squares have a chain 2 in each of the corners. If your square had 3 chains in the corner, you would want to leave that middle chain unworked, and you would work in the chains on either side. We're going to begin by working in the chain closest to that first stitch on that side. So I'm going to be inserting my hook into this chain in that chain 2 corner space. So insert your hook from the right side to the wrong side, and I'm going to work a slip stitch. And you work a slip stitch by yarning over and then pulling through the stitch as well as the loop that's on your hook to complete your slip stitch. So I've worked my first slip stitch, and now I'm going to be pulling up my square in the back. Again, this is the front side or the right side of that square, and I'm going to find that chain 2 corner space. So here are those 2 chains, and I'm going to be joining this side to this side. So I'm going to want to work into that chain that's closest to that side, to that stitch on that side. So this is my chain that I'm going to be inserting my hook. I'm going to insert my hook into the front of that chain to the back. My yarn is going to be underneath that square, and I'm going to go ahead and yarn over and pull through the stitch and then pull through the loop to complete that slip stitch. So now I'm going to be working into the top of each of the stitches along this side of my square. So I'm coming back to my front square here, inserting my hook into the top of that next stitch that's right next to that chain, inserting it from the front to the back, yarning over and pulling through to complete my slip stitch. Then I'm going to come to my back square here. I'm going to find the next stitch on that side next to that chain, inserting my hook into the front to the back, then yarning over, pulling through that stitch, pulling through that loop on the front side. Front square, insert your hook right side to wrong side, yarn over, pull through, next stitch, yarn over, and pull through. You're definitely going to want to pay attention to the tension, how tightly you're working these stitches. You don't want to work these too tightly. That will distort your squares. So keep a nice loose tension as you're working these slip stitches. And you're going to be working these slip stitches in each stitch of both sides of your square, working back and forth from square to square. And you're going to continue working all the way down the side to your next chain 2 space of each corner, and then we'll be bringing in our next squares that we're going to be joining. So you can see here what a nice, beautiful texture and interesting look that this slip stitch join has. So continue working in each stitch, front and back, to your next corner chain 2 space. So I've worked that stitch all along my join on the sides of these 2 squares, and I'm now at the corner. But I would recommend, as you're working through these squares, that every once in a while you just put your squares down flat. Make sure that your join looks nice and even, your stitches have nice loose tension but still even stitches, that your squares don't look distorted, it's not bunching up at all, and so you have a nice even join for these 2 squares. Then you can go ahead and move on to working that corner. So I've worked through each of the stitches all the way to that chain 2 space, and you're going to just work another slip stitch into this front square in that next chain. So the one right next to that stitch that you just worked, another slip stitch, and then on that back square you're going to be working into that next chain right next to the stitch that you just worked. So just insert your hook into that chain and then slip stitch. So now you're ready to bring in your next 2 squares. So I have my next square that's going up above my peppermint candy here, and you're going to find that chain 2 space. Again, this is the right side of your square, and that chain 2 space. You're going to skip over that first chain, and you're going to be working that slip stitch join into that chain that's right next to that stitch on the side that you're going to be joining. So again, inserting your hook from the right side to the wrong side, and then completing a slip stitch. Now I need my next square that I'm going to be joining, which is my Santa, and I'm going to find that chain 2 space again here, and you're going to be working in that chain right next to the stitch on the side that you're going to be joining. So I'm going to be inserting my hook from the front to the back into that chain. And then completing a slip stitch. Coming back to the front square, into that top of that next stitch there, slip stitch. Coming to the back, the next stitch, inserting our hook, and completing a slip stitch. So I'm working through these chain 2 spaces, and now I'm going to be using that same method, working all along this side, joining both of these squares together. So when you come to the end of your joining, so you don't want to add any more squares, you want to complete your join in those last chains at the end of each square. So in that chain 2 space, in that next chain, inserting your hook into that chain next to that stitch you worked in the front square, slip stitch. Then in the back square, in that chain, insert your hook and slip stitch. Then chain 1, and you can go ahead and fasten off. And then after I've worked all the columns together, I'm going to come back and work these rows between the squares. So I've completed working all of my columns and joining all of my columns of squares together, and now I'm working on the rows. So you can see I started working at the 2 corners just as I did previously, worked through joining that side, and now I'm at my join corner here. I am completing this join for these 2 squares here. I'm at the chain space. I've worked through the last stitch. So the front square, I'm going to go ahead and work into that chain, and I'm going to yarn over and pull through both to complete that slip stitch. Now on my back square, I'm going to work into that chain, and I'm going to insert my hook underneath that join from the columns. So this join here between the columns, I'm inserting my hook underneath that join. My yarn is over top of it, and now I'm going to yarn over and pull through both to complete that slip stitch. Now I can move on to these squares, joining them by working in that first chain in the same manner, working a slip stitch. Then the chain on the back square, slip stitch. First stitch, slip stitch. And so I'm just going to continue repeating all of that through this square and all the other squares as well to the end, just working my join. And you can see here I end up with a very nice flat join between all 4 squares. So you'll just continue on working all of your squares together in that same way. So you can see I've completed working my rows, and of course the columns are already done, and you can see these nice joins between the 4 squares, as well as the completed look of this join. This join is also relatively flat to your square. I mean, even though there is some texture, you can see the braided, the slip stitches are on top of your square. You're not getting a ridge that you might see with other slip stitch join methods. So it is a lovely way to join any granny squares. It's certainly something that I will be using in the future as well with other granny square projects. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you found this tutorial helpful today. As always, remember to check out nanascraftyhome.com, where you can find lots of free patterns and tutorials as well. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.